The text came on a Thursday. I was in my car, parked outside a title company in Buckhead, reviewing closing documents on my laptop before going inside. The deal had taken 11 months to put together, 11 months of due diligence and negotiation and financing arrangements, and the particular kind of patience that commercial real estate demands from people who are trying to do it right rather than fast. I was 45 minutes early to the meeting, because I'm always early to important things, because being early is the only way I know how to manage the anxiety that comes with important things. And I was sitting in my car in the morning sun, reading through the final documents one more time, when my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't immediately recognize. The message said, "Hi, this is Brenda Watkins. I go to First Community Church with your mom. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I got your number from the directory. I wanted you to know that your mother has been sharing some concerns about you with the prayer group, and I felt you should be aware of what's being said. I hope you're doing okay. God bless." I stared at the message for a moment. Then I typed back, "Thank you for letting me know, Brenda. What has she been saying?" Brenda replied within 2 minutes, which told me she had been waiting for the response, had been sitting with her phone, had been debating with herself about whether to send the first message, and had decided, on the side of conscience, that I deserved to know. What she wrote was long. I am going to give you the summary. My mother had been telling her prayer group that she was worried about me, that I had been pulling away from the family, that she suspected I was in a bad situation, possibly drugs, possibly a bad relationship, possibly both, that she had been praying for my soul and hoped the group would join her, that she didn't know where she had gone wrong. I read the message twice. Then I put my phone in my bag, picked up my folder of closing documents, and walked into the title company to close on a $1.2 million commercial property. Because the deal didn't care about what my mother had said at church. The deal had a timeline, and the timeline was today. And I had spent 11 months getting to today, and I was not going to let a Thursday morning text message take me out of the room I needed to be in. I will tell you what I felt later. First, let me tell you how I got there, to that closing table, to that particular Thursday, to the specific situation of being a person my mother was telling church people to pray for, while I was signing my name to 7 figures of real estate. I grew up in Marietta, Georgia. My mother is a woman of deep and genuine faith, and I want to say that clearly at the start, because I do not want this to be a story that is dismissive of faith or of the community that faith creates. First Community Church was, for much of my childhood, a genuinely good thing in our lives. It was where we had community, where we had ritual, where we had the particular comfort of belonging to something larger than our family and our neighborhood. I was baptized there. I was in the youth group. I sang in the junior choir for 3 years, which I have never told many people, because I am not sure it fits the image I tend to project as an adult, but it is true. My mother's faith is real. Her connection to that community is real. What I am going to tell you about is not the faith or the community. It is a specific way that faith and community can be weaponized, not intentionally, not maliciously, but through the particular dynamics of a close religious community, where personal information shared as prayer requests travels freely, and where the performance of concern can sometimes shade into the performance of victimhood. My mother is a person who, for as long as I can remember, has expressed her own difficulties and worries primarily through the lens of what her children were doing wrong. She is not a cruel woman. She loves me in the way that complicated parents love their children, genuinely, and also with conditions, and also with a need to narrate her own life in ways that position her as the suffering protagonist. I did not understand this clearly when I was growing up. I understand it clearly now, and the clarity has made it possible for me to have a relationship with her that is honest, if not always comfortable. What I want to tell you about first is the pattern that led to the church situation, because the church situation did not come from nowhere. I am the second of 3 children. My older brother Marcus is 11 years older than me and has always occupied a position of relative peace in my mother's regard. He is steady and conventional and lives 20 minutes from my mother and attends First Community Church himself and calls on Sundays. He is what she understands, and what she understands, she does not worry about. My younger sister Dana is 5 years younger than me and has always been in our mother's framework the fragile one, the one who needs more, the one she worries about most acutely. Dana knows this and has used it, consciously or not, to maintain a particular kind of centrality in my mother's attention. And then there is me. I am the middle child in the particular way that certain middle children are. I am the one who does not fit the established categories. I am not conventional and predictable like Marcus, and I am not fragile and requiring like Dana. I am something else, ambitious in ways my mother does not entirely understand, private in ways she finds unsettling, pursuing a path that does not map onto any template she has available. When I was 24, I quit a stable job in corporate accounting to pursue real estate investing full-time. I did not tell my mother in advance. I told her after the fact, after I had enough financial runway to be confident I was not making an impulsive decision, after I had 2 investment properties already under management and a plan for the third. I told her over dinner at her house on a Sunday in April, thinking that the specifics, the existing properties, the financial projections, the business plan I had assembled, would communicate the seriousness of what I was doing. She did not ask about the specifics. She asked how I was going to pay my health insurance. This was not an unreasonable question. Health insurance is a real concern for people who leave corporate employment. But it was also the question that told me what framework she was using. That she had heard, quit my job, and filed everything else under the category of impulsive and risky. And that the category was already closed before the specifics could enter it. I told her I had a plan for health insurance. She said she hoped I knew what I was doing. My brother Marcus, who was at dinner, said he thought real estate could be a good investment, and asked some questions that showed he had done some research before the conversation, which I appreciated. My mother said she would pray for me. She said it the way she said it when she was worried, which was fine. I expected worry. What I did not expect, what I did not know was happening for the 2 years following that dinner, was the shape the worry took in the context of her church community. Let me tell you what I was actually doing in those 2 years, while my mother was telling her prayer group to pray for me. I had quit corporate accounting at 24, with a plan that I had been building for 3 years while I was employed. Quietly, privately, the way I do things that matter to me, because I had learned that sharing my plans before they were real gave people the opportunity to dismantle them, and I had decided not to give them that opportunity. The plan was this. I had been investing in residential rental properties since I was 22, using every dollar I could save from my accounting salary, starting small, a single-family home in a suburb of Atlanta that I had bought under market value, renovated with a combination of hired labor and my own work on weekends, and rented at a rate that gave me a positive cash flow from the first month. I had done the same thing with a second property 14 months later. By the time I quit my job, I had 2 properties generating combined net income of approximately $2,200 per month. Not enough to live on comfortably, but enough to demonstrate that the model worked and to give me a foundation. Not quickly. I did not believe in moving fast with real estate, because fast is where people make mistakes, where they overlook things in due diligence, or over-leverage on financing, or underestimate the operational complexity of a larger portfolio. I believed in moving deliberately, which is slower, and less exciting to describe at family dinners, and more likely to produce results that are real, rather than spectacular and temporary. Over the 2 years following my departure from corporate accounting, I added 3 more properties, all residential, all in the Atlanta metro area, all acquired at prices that reflected distress or motivated sellers and improved through focused capital investment and good property management. My portfolio grew. My income grew with it. I hired a part-time property manager. I started underwriting commercial deals, larger properties with more complex financing structures, but with correspondingly larger income potential. I was working in that period harder than I had ever worked. 12, 14-hour days, weekends on job sites, evenings underwriting spreadsheets. The particular grinding, unglamorous effort of building something from the ground up, without any of the visibility or validation that employment provides. My mother saw none of this. I did not show it to her. I had learned from the dinner in April and from 24 years of being the child she did not understand, that showing it to her before it was complete and undeniable would be counterproductive. She would worry. She would share the worry with her prayer group. She would frame my efforts as problems to be solved by prayer, rather than projects to be respected as ambition. So I kept it private. And in the absence of information, she filled the space with worry. which was entirely predictable, and also, I will admit, something I should have anticipated more directly. When you give a worrier no information, they do not conclude that everything is fine. They conclude that something is being hidden, and they fill in the something with their fears. My mother's fears apparently included drugs. I want to tell you about the 11 months that led to the closing. The commercial property, a mixed-use building in a neighborhood just outside downtown Atlanta, with retail space on the ground floor and 4 apartment units above, had come to my attention through a broker I had been working with for 2 years. He called me in January of that year and said he had something that might interest me, and when I looked at the numbers, I understood immediately why he had called me specifically. The property was underperforming. The owner, a man in his 70s who had bought the building in the 1980s and had been managing it in a declining, increasingly passive way for the past decade, had let occupancy slip to 60% and had not raised rents to market rates in years. The physical condition was tired, but not failing. The location, in a neighborhood that was in the early stages of what brokers call transition, had significant upside if you believed in the direction of the market. I believed in the direction of the market. I had been watching that neighborhood for 18 months. The asking price was $1.4 million. The price at which the deal made sense to me, given the occupancy situation and the capital investment that would be required to bring it to full performance, was closer to $1.1 million. We had 11 months to find the middle. 11 months of negotiation, due diligence, financing arrangement, and the particular emotional endurance of a deal that almost died 3 times. Once when the seller got cold feet and pulled back in May. Once when my primary lender had an internal policy change in August that required me to find supplemental financing from a different source. Once in October when an environmental review flagged a historical issue with the property that required additional testing and a 3-week delay that I was not sure the seller would wait through. He waited. The testing came back clean. The financing came together. We set a closing date in December. The closing was on a Thursday in December. The morning Brenda Watkins texted me. I walked into the title company with my folder and my coffee, and the Thursday morning text sitting in my phone like a small bomb, and I sat down at the conference table across from the seller's attorney and my own attorney and the title officer, and we went through the documents. I am going to tell you what it felt like to sit at that table with the knowledge of what my mother had been saying, because I think the feeling is worth describing. It felt like 2 things at once. The first thing, a kind of deep, tired sadness. The specific sadness of understanding that the person who is supposed to believe in you most is the person who imagined you at your lowest, while you are actually at one of your highest points. The sadness is not sharp. I had been managing my expectations about my mother for a long time, and sharp had given way to dull a while back. But it was present, a heaviness behind the professional alertness I was maintaining. The second thing, a resolve that I can only describe as concrete, the kind of resolve that comes from having worked for 11 months toward a specific goal and arriving at the day of it. I had done the work. The deal was real. The documents in front of me were the proof of something I had built entirely on my own, without family support, without a network of connections inherited from my parents, without anyone at First Community Church praying for my closing. I had built it with the same quietness with which I had built everything else. And it was real. And no Thursday morning text message was going to make it less real. I signed my name in all the places indicated. My hand did not shake. When the closing was done, when the last document was signed and notarized, and the title officer was making copies, and the handshakes had been exchanged, I sat for a moment in the conference room after everyone else had started gathering their things, and I took one breath that was specifically for the feeling of it, for the acknowledgement to myself that this had happened, that the 11 months and the 3 years before them, and the 2 years of hushed phone calls from Brenda's prayer group had all arrived here, at this table, at this set of signed documents. Then I picked up my folder and walked out into the December morning and sat in my car. I took out my phone and looked at Brenda's text. I thought about what I wanted to do with the information it contained, and I want to walk you through that thinking because I believe it is the most important part of this story. There are several things you can do when you find out that your mother has been telling her church community that you are a drug addict. You can be angry. Anger was available to me. I will not pretend it wasn't. The specific anger of a person who has worked in private and been misrepresented in public is a real and legitimate anger, and I felt it, like a heat behind the sadness. You can confront. You can call your mother immediately from the parking lot of the title company and tell her what you know and what it has done to you and what you expect her to do about it. You can do nothing. You can absorb the information, file it in the place where you keep things that hurt you and that you have decided not to carry, and continue building your life without addressing it. I did none of those things. Not immediately. What I did immediately was go to the property. I drove from Buckhead to the building I had just purchased, 15 minutes in Atlanta traffic, which on a good day means 30 minutes, but that Thursday was cooperating, and I parked in front of it and looked at it. It was not beautiful. Mixed-use buildings in transitional neighborhoods rarely are. It was functional and solid and slightly worn, and the retail space on the ground floor was occupied by a laundry business and a small insurance office. And the upper floor windows showed the particular curtain and plant arrangements of occupied apartments. And the whole thing looked exactly like what it was, a real piece of a real city, generating real income, owned now by me. I sat in front of it for 20 minutes. Then I went home and spent 2 hours doing absolutely nothing productive, which is how I process things. And then I called my friend and business advisor Kendra and told her about the closing and about the text. And she congratulated me on the closing and said about the text, "What are you going to do about your mother?" I said, "I'm going to wait for the pastor to call." She said, "Why do you think the pastor will call?" I said, "Because Brenda said the prayer group was involved, and if the prayer group was involved, Pastor Gideon knows about it, and Pastor Gideon has always felt that his role includes pastoral outreach to the people his congregation is concerned about." Kendra said, "You know your church." I said, "I know my mother." The pastor called on Monday. His name is Pastor Gideon Clark, and he has been the head pastor of First Community Church for 22 years. And he is a man I respect genuinely, a thoughtful, principled person who takes his pastoral responsibilities seriously, and who has, on the several occasions I have interacted with him as an adult, struck me as someone who cares about the people in his congregation, rather than simply the institution. He called at 11 in the morning on Monday. I was at the property, walking through the upper floor units with a contractor I had hired to do a baseline assessment of the work needed. I let it go to voicemail. Then I called back at 2 in the afternoon from the driveway of the building. He answered on the second ring. He said, "Is this Vanessa?" "Thank you for calling, Pastor Gideon." He said, "Your mother has shared some concerns with me about how you're doing, and I wanted to reach out personally. How are you?" I said, "I'm doing very well, actually. I'm calling you from the driveway of a commercial property I just purchased. I closed on Thursday." A brief pause. He said, "A commercial property?" I said, "Mixed-use building, retail and residential, in Atlanta." Another pause. I could hear him processing, the recalibration happening in real time. He said, "Your mother had indicated she was concerned about some choices you'd been making." I said, "I'm aware of what my mother has been sharing with the prayer group, Pastor Gideon. Someone was kind enough to let me know." A longer pause this time. He said, "I see." I said, "I want you to know that I am not using drugs. I am not in a dangerous relationship. I am not making bad choices. I am building a real estate business, and I have been doing so for 5 years, and it is going well. The property I closed on Thursday is the largest acquisition I've made to date, and I am proud of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad to hear it. I want you to know that the concern came from a place of love." I said, "I understand that. I also want you to know that the information being shared in the prayer group was inaccurate, and that it has caused me some real hurt." He said, "That's understandable. I'm sorry." I said, "I appreciate that. I do want to speak with my mother directly, and I plan to. I just wanted you to have the accurate picture." He said, "I appreciate you telling me, Vanessa, and I say this with respect. I hope you'll find a way to let your mother in a little more. She worries because she loves you, even if the worry has gone in some wrong directions." I sat in my car in my driveway and thought about that for a moment. I said, "I hear you, Pastor Gideon, and I'll think about what you've said." We said goodbye. I sat for a while longer. He was right, and I knew he was right, and the rightness of it didn't make the hurt smaller, but it added something to the picture, a context that the hurt alone didn't include. I called my mother that evening. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been expecting my call, probably since Brenda had told her that she had texted me, which I suspected had happened, because Brenda struck me as the kind of woman who would feel guilty about the first text, and then feel obligated to tell my mother about it. She said, "Vanessa." I said, "Hi, Mom." A pause, then, "I suppose you talked to Brenda." I said, "I did." She said, "I hope you know I was only worried about you." I said, "I know you were worried. I want to talk about what you said." She said, "I didn't say anything that wasn't true. I am worried. You pulled away. You never tell me anything. I don't know what's going on in your life." I said, "Mom." She stopped. "You told the prayer group I might be using drugs." A silence that was different from the previous silences, heavier. She said, "I said I was concerned. I said I didn't know what was going on, and I was afraid it might be something serious." I said, "You mentioned drugs specifically, according to Brenda." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I was afraid. I didn't know what else to think." I also want you to understand what it felt like to find out, from a stranger, that my mother had been telling her community that I was a drug addict. She said, "I never used that word." "Mom," I said, "please." She stopped. I said, "On Thursday morning, when Brenda's text came, I was sitting in my car outside a title company in Buckhead. I was about to close on a commercial property, a $1.2 million building, that I have spent 11 months acquiring. That Thursday, while you were at prayer group asking people to pray for your wayward daughter, I was signing my name to the largest real estate deal of my career." Silence. "I have been building a real estate business for 5 years," I said. "I have 6 properties. I employ a property manager and work with contractors and brokers and attorneys. I work 12-hour days, and I read market reports on weekends, and I have made something real out of nothing, without any help from anyone in this family, without telling anyone in this family, because I have learned very thoroughly that this family's first response to anything I am doing is to worry about it and project it as a problem." My mother's voice, when she spoke, was very small. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't, and that's partly on me. I should have told you more. I closed myself off because I needed the protection of privacy while I was building, and I understand now that the privacy cost you something too. It left a space that you filled with fear." She said, "I should have asked more questions." I said, "Yes. I should have trusted you more," she said. I said, "Yes." A long silence. And then she said something that surprised me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so simply and directly what I had been waiting to hear. She said, "I am so proud of you." Not with ceremony, not with a preamble, not with the qualifications that pride in our family usually came wrapped in. Just, "I am so proud of you." I said, "Thank you, Mom." She said, $1 million building." I said, 1.2. She said, 1.2. And I could hear in the way she said it that she was sitting with the number, turning it over, understanding something about her daughter that she had not understood before. We talked for a long time after that. I told her more than I had told her in years, about the properties, about how the business worked, about the 11 months of the commercial deal, about the broker and the contractor and the property manager. She asked questions. They were not always the right questions. She did not always have the vocabulary for what I was describing, but she asked them, and the asking was itself a form of attention I had not received from her before. At some point she said, "I'm going to have to talk to Brenda." I said, "Yes, you probably should." She said, "I'm going to have to talk to the prayer group." I said, "That would mean a lot to me." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I hope they understand that a mother's worry doesn't always take the right shape." I said, "I think most of them probably do." We said goodnight. I sat on my couch with my phone in my lap, and the particular quality of quiet that settles over you after something long and necessary has been said. What happened at church? My mother spoke to her prayer group on the following Sunday. I was not there. I have not attended First Community Church regularly in years, and that Sunday was not the right occasion for a return. But my mother called me Sunday evening and told me what had happened. She had stood up during the prayer request portion of the service, and she had said, I am using her words as closely as I can reconstruct them from what she told me. She had said, I want to correct something I shared with this group a few weeks ago about my daughter Vanessa. I told you I was worried about her, and I implied things about her situation that were not true. The truth is that Vanessa is doing extraordinarily well. She is a real estate investor and businesswoman, and last week she closed on $1 million property in Atlanta. I was afraid, because I didn't know, and I spoke from fear rather than from knowledge, and I want to set the record straight. She said the group was very kind about it. Several people came up afterward to say they would now pray for my success instead of my soul, which made my mother laugh, and I was glad she could laugh about it. Brenda Watkins sent me another text that Sunday evening. It said, "Your mom set everything straight today. She was very brave. We are all rooting for you." I replied, "Thank you for telling me the truth on Thursday. It mattered." She replied with a heart emoji. Pastor Gideon came to see the property. I invited him. I thought about whether to invite him for about a week, and then decided yes, for reasons that I want to explain because they matter to me. Pastor Gideon's comment in our phone call, that I should let my mother in more, was correct and important, and it landed in a way that I sat with for weeks. The correctness of it was uncomfortable, because it required me to acknowledge something I had been avoiding, that my privacy, while it had served a protective function during the building years, had also been a way of punishing the people who had underestimated me. Not consciously, not deliberately, but functionally. By keeping my success hidden from my family, I had also kept myself hidden from them. And the hiding had costs for all of us. I had been building a wall, and the wall had kept me safe, and the wall had also kept me isolated. I was ready to take part of it down. Inviting Pastor Gideon to see the property was a step in that direction, an acknowledgement that the community I had kept at a distance had people in it who were genuine, who cared about me, who deserved a more honest picture of my life than I had given them. He came on a Saturday morning in January. We walked through the building together. He asked thoughtful questions about the tenants, about my plans for the property, about how I had learned what I knew. He was clearly unfamiliar with the specifics of commercial real estate, and he did not pretend otherwise. He asked questions from genuine curiosity, rather than from the need to appear informed. I appreciated that. On the roof, we had gone up to look at the HVAC situation, which was one of the capital improvements on my list. He looked out at the Atlanta skyline and said, "Your mother doesn't have the vocabulary for what you're doing. That's not the same as not being proud." I said, "I know that now." He said, "She talked about you for years in that prayer group, not just in the worried way, in the proud way too. The way you handled yourself, the way you always figured things out. She just didn't know the specifics of what you were figuring out." I looked at the skyline for a moment. "She should have asked more," I said. "Yes," he said, "she should have." "And I should have told more," I said. "Yes," he said, "you should have." He smiled, the particular smile of a person who has been doing pastoral work for 22 years and has seen this specific dynamic approximately 400 times. "The good news," he said, "is that you're both figuring it out." I said, "Eventually." He said, "That's usually how it happens. Where things are now." I have been inside my mother's church twice since that January visit with Pastor Gideon. Not because I have returned to regular attendance. I have not, and I do not expect to. But because I have accepted that this community is important to my mother, and that engaging with it occasionally is a way of engaging with her, which is a thing I have decided I want to do. My mother came to Atlanta in March, first time she had visited me in 4 years. I took her to the building. I took her inside, through the retail spaces, up to the apartments, out onto the roof where I had stood with Pastor Gideon. She walked through it slowly, touching things with the particular reverence of a person who is trying to understand something through physical contact with it. In the laundry on the ground floor, she ran her hand along one of the washing machines and said, "You own this." I said, "I own this." She said, "And the apartments upstairs?" I said, "All 4. She said, "And you bought it by yourself?" I said, "By myself, with a lender and a broker and a lot of spreadsheets, but yes." She stood in the middle of the laundry and looked at the machines and the folding tables and the afternoon light coming through the windows, and she said, "Your grandmother, my mother, used to take me to a laundromat when I was small. We didn't have a machine. She used to say that someday we'd own our own washer." She looked at me. "You own the whole laundromat," she said. It was the most perfectly complete thing she could have said. I don't think she planned it. I think it simply arrived, the way true things arrive sometimes, from somewhere deeper than planning. I said, "I'm still working on the dryers," and it was the laugh of a woman who is proud of her daughter. Not the laugh of a woman performing pride for an audience. The private, real laugh that happens between two people when something is exactly right. My relationship with my mother has changed since that December. Not dramatically. I want to be careful about overclaiming. These things do not resolve like equations, they shift like tides. The fundamental dynamic of who we are to each other, her tendency to worry, my tendency to close, the long history of a communication pattern that served neither of us particularly well, does not evaporate in the aftermath of one good conversation. But she calls more, and the calls are different. She asks what I am working on. She reports this information to the prayer group, apparently. Brenda texts me occasionally with the prayer group's congratulations when something goes well, which I find both slightly absurd and genuinely touching. She told me recently that she has started describing me to people as my daughter who does real estate in Atlanta, and that this description is delivered with a particular emphasis on the word real, as if she has decided that the reality of what I do is itself the impressive part. She is right that the reality is the impressive part. I have expanded the portfolio since the commercial acquisition. 2 more properties, smaller, residential, steady. I am looking at a second commercial deal that I expect to close within the year. The business that I built in the years when nobody was watching is a real thing, with real employees and real tenants and real income and a future that I can see clearly from here. And my mother knows about it now. All of it. She has the vocabulary, she has been asking me questions for a year, and I have been answering them, and she is developing a genuine understanding of what I do in the way that a person who cares about you develops understanding when you give them the information to work with. I gave her the information. She took it seriously. That is not nothing. That is actually the whole arc of what I wanted from her. Not her expertise, not her resources, not her network. Just her attention and her seriousness. Just the feeling of being known by the person who made you. I have it now. Later than I would have liked. Through a route I could not have predicted. But I have it. I want to end by talking about something Pastor Gideon said on the roof, because I have thought about it many times since. He said, a lot of people build things to prove something to the people who doubted them. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a legitimate motivation. But the best builders are the ones who eventually stop building for the doubters and start building for themselves. The ones who get there first do it faster. I said, "Which kind am I?" He thought about it for a moment. "Honestly," he said, "both. In order. Which is fine. Most people have to go through the proving before they get to the building for themselves. The question is whether you notice when you've crossed the line." I asked him, "When do you think I crossed it?" He said, "I think you crossed it about 2 years ago. I think the commercial deal was the first thing you did primarily because you wanted to do it, rather than primarily because you wanted to have done it." I thought about that, about the distinction between the wanting and the having done, about the 11 months of the deal and what had driven me through the hard parts of it, the seller's cold feet, the financing complications, the environmental delay. He was right. I had not been thinking about my mother during those 11 months. I had been thinking about the building, about the neighborhood, about the model I was building and the future I was moving toward. The wanting was mine. The building was mine. The having done it was also mine. And the pride, the real, internal, independent pride, was mine too. The church knows now. The prayer group has changed the nature of their prayers. But none of that changed what the building is. The building is mine. It was mine before anyone knew about it. It will be mine long after the prayer group has moved on to other concerns. And I think that is exactly how it should be. If you grew up in a family where your faith or your community was sometimes the vehicle for someone else's story about you, if you have ever been the subject of someone's prayer request when you were actually in the middle of doing something extraordinary, this one is for you. Keep building. They will catch up eventually. And when they do, when your mother calls you from the laundry room of your building and says the exact right thing without knowing she's saying the exact right thing, You will understand that the years of building in private were not only a defense. They were a gift you were preparing. For yourself, first. For her, second. Both things can be true. Thank you for listening. Subscribe for more stories. Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it.